We're diving deep into some heavy, heavy history today. Get ready, because we're tackling the Ocoee Election Day Massacre. And you know what? A lot of people haven't even heard about this.
That's true. It's a story that's been hidden for way too long. But, it's got some serious lessons for us, like about voting rights, racial justice, and how we deal with our past.
It's wild, right? Like, something this awful could happen, and then poof, gone from the history books like it never happened. So where do we even start with something like this?
Well, we got to rewind. Back to the South, just after World War I. Imagine black soldiers coming home, right? They put their lives on the line for their country and then, bam, denied their basic rights.
Yeah, I mean, they saw the world, fought for freedom, and come back to a system that's, like, designed to keep them down.
Exactly. It was a time of massive change, social and political. These veterans, they wanted their rightful place in society. But Jim Crow laws, still in full effect.
Ugh, those laws were like a chokehold, weren't they?
Man.
Squeezing the life out of black people's lives.
You got it. Poll taxes, literacy tests, you name it. All these tactics to stop black people from voting. The whole system was built on fear, man. Straight up intimidation.
And then you get the KKK rearing its ugly head again in the 1910s, adding fuel to the fire.
The Klan's terror, you can't downplay that. They were the muscle behind this whole messed up racial hierarchy. Violence and intimidation, that was their game, keeping black communities in line.
So you get all this tension bubbling under the surface, and then Election Day 1920 hits. In Ocoee, Florida, when Mose Norman comes in, right?
Yeah, Mose Norman, he was a black farmer, just wanted to vote, simple as that. But that day, they wouldn't let him. Every excuse in the book just to block him.
Can you imagine the frustration? The anger?
Yeah.
Denied a basic right just because of the color of his skin.
And Mose, he was smart. He started writing everything down, the officials, their names, everything, trying to hold them accountable. And that's when things went from bad to worse.
That took guts, man. Standing up like that. Had to shake things up.
Oh, it did. It sent a wave of fear through some of those white folks. They saw him demanding his rights, and they saw it as a threat, like he was messing with their power.
So instead of dealing with the real issue, the voter suppression, they go for violence.
Sadly, yeah. A white mob, they form up. At first, they're after Mose Norman, but then their anger shifts to a big name in the black community, a guy named Julius July Perry.
I heard July Perry was more than just a resident, right? He was a leader, successful businessman, the whole 9 yards.
You got it. Owned land, ran businesses, a pillar of the black community in Ocoee. So when that mob shows up at his house, he knew, man, he and his family were in serious danger.
I can't even imagine facing down a mob like that. What happened next?
July Perry, he decided to protect his home, his family. Mob attacks, and he fires back. 2 white men end up dead, tragically. Man, he was just trying to protect his own, but that sealed his fate right there. That mob, they were enraged, out for blood, and they wanted revenge. They overpowered July Perry and lynched him. Left his body there as a warning, a message to the whole black community.
It's sickening. But it didn't stop there, did it? Even after killing July Perry, the mob was still thirsty for blood. This was just the start of a nightmare.
It was. That lynching, it set off a full-blown massacre. The mob went crazy, burning houses, churches, businesses, anything owned by black people, just destroying everything.
So this wasn't just some random act of violence. It was planned, systematic.
Yeah, you got it. This was calculated terror. They wanted to wipe out the black community in Ocoee, just erase it. We still don't know exactly how many people died that night. It was chaos. And then there was a cover-up, people trying to bury the truth. But estimates, they say anywhere from 30 to 80 African Americans were murdered.
80. It's hard to wrap your head around that kind of violence. The scale of it is just, I don't even have words. What about the people who survived? The families that were left behind?
Man, the impact was devastating. So many black folks fled Ocoee after that. They were terrified, just left everything behind. Homes, jobs, their whole community gone.
Imagine being forced to leave your home, everything you know, just to escape that terror.
The trauma from that massacre, it lasted for generations. You can see it in the census data. In 1920, Ocoee had a thriving black community. By 1930, almost all gone.
Ocoee became one of those sundown towns, where black people weren't welcome after dark.
It's like the massacre did what it was supposed to do, wiped out the black community in Ocoee.
Chilling, isn't it? And that's the thing. The Ocoee massacre sent a message to black folks all across the South, a message of fear. Like, this is what happens when you try to exercise your rights, when you step out of line.
It's crazy how something this horrible, this act of racial terrorism, could be swept under the rug for so long. Yeah, for decades, people barely talked about the Ocoee massacre. History books, a few lines maybe, or nothing at all. It was like everyone agreed to just forget it ever happened, to erase this ugly part of history.
Conspiracy of silence.
You could say that. But in recent years, people have started speaking up. There's this whole movement to uncover the truth, to remember the victims, to make sure we never forget this happened.
That's got to be a little bit of light in all this darkness. What's being done to bring this story out to the open?
Well, historians and scholars, they're doing a lot of research, trying to piece together what happened that night, finding people who were there, eyewitness accounts, giving a voice to the victims and their families.
Like a historical investigation, right?
Right.
Searching for justice, for recognition.
That's it. And there are actual physical memorials now. In Ocoee, they put up historical markers acknowledging what happened back in 1920 so people can remember the lives lost, the whole community destroyed.
Those markers, they're more than just symbols. They're like official recognition of this tragedy that was ignored for too long.
And education's a big part of it, too. They're trying to teach kids about the Ocoee Massacre in schools, make sure future generations know about this part of history, even though it's hard to face.
It's about understanding, right, where we came from, how this fits into the bigger story of racial injustice in America.
Exactly. And the research is still going on. They're trying to find out everything they can to identify all the victims, to see how this massacre impacted the families, the descendants of those who were there. It's a long process.
So this isn't just about the past, then. The Ocoee Massacre has implications for today, for the fight for racial justice that's still going on.
Without a doubt. It makes us ask some hard questions about voting rights, about racial terror, about how we remember history. It forces us to look at racism, the legacy of it, and how it still impacts communities today.
Let's talk about that. Why should we care about something that happened over 100 years ago? What does it mean for us now?
Well, for one, the fight for voting rights, it's still happening. People are still trying to stop certain groups from voting, especially people of color.
Like we're seeing the same things happen again, just in different ways.
Exactly. The methods might be different, but the goal is the same. Take away power from certain groups and hold on to it themselves. And that racial terror, we see it everywhere. In the systems, in healthcare, education, the justice system, the past, it's still with us.
The Ocoee Massacre, it's not just some event from the history books. It's a wake-up call. It reminds us of the work we still have to do, the fight for racial justice that hasn't ended.
That's right. We have to learn from what happened, acknowledge the wrongs, and work to make things right, make society fair for everyone. We can't let these stories fade away.
We can't. Remembering, honoring the victims, understanding why this happened, it's all part of the struggle for racial justice. It's about facing our history, even the painful parts, so we can build something better. The Ocoee Massacre shows us what hate can do when it's allowed to grow. But it also shows us the strength of people who fight for what's right. What do you think about that?
It never ends, does it? That back and forth. You got the people trying to tear us apart and the people fighting to bring us together. The Ocoee Massacre shows us how fast hate can take over. But it also shows the strength of the people fighting for what's right, They never gave up.
It makes you think about what happened to the people who had to run. The families torn apart. How do they deal with all that?
That night, man, it left scars, deep scars. A lot of those survivors, they carried that pain their whole lives. They lost it all. Homes, loved ones, that sense of belonging, And for their kids, their grandkids, the story of the Ocoee Massacre, it was passed down like this painful inheritance.
So remembering what happened, that's just part of it. It's also about recognizing how that trauma, it didn't just disappear, it got passed down through generations.
Exactly. That's why it's so important that people are digging up the truth now, honoring those victims. It's a way to heal, to acknowledge the pain, to make sure those stories are never forgotten.
These stories need to be told, shared, taught. What can we do to make sure something like this never happens again?
Well, first off, we got to know what happened. Learn about Ocoee, learn about all the other times racial violence has erupted, That's a start. We got to support the organizations fighting for racial justice, for voting rights, and we got to hold our leaders accountable, make sure they're making policies that protect everyone, no matter their race or background.
So it's like a three-pronged attack. Educate ourselves, speak up, and take action.
That's it. We all have a part to play in dismantling the system, making things fair for everyone. The Ocoee Massacre, it's a tragedy, shows us what can happen when hate takes root. But it's also a call to action, reminds us we can't just sit back. We got to fight for justice, for equality, for all.
Well said. The Ocoee Massacre, it's a story that needs to be heard. It makes us look at our past, and it pushes us to fight for a better future. It reminds us that democracy is fragile, and some people, They'll do anything to hold on to power, but it also shows the incredible strength of people fighting for what's right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you keep learning about this history, find ways to get involved in the fight for justice. It's not over yet.